Welcome back to EtherLink AI Insights. I'm Alex, and today we're diving into a topic that's absolutely critical for enterprises across Europe right now: AI governance and readiness, specifically through the lens of Amsterdam and Dutch organizations in 2026. Sam, we're seeing a really interesting paradox here. Amsterdam's become this thriving AI hub, but the readiness gap is stark.
Exactly. And what strikes me most is the data. 73% of European enterprises have launched AI pilots, but only 28% have achieved production-grade governance frameworks. That's a massive chasm, Alex. We're talking about organizations that have spent months, sometimes years, building AI capabilities. And then they hit a wall because they haven't built the governance structure to actually deploy and scale responsibly.
That's a painful realization to have after all that investment. And for Amsterdam specifically, the maturity score sits at 2.8 out of 5. What does that actually mean on the ground? Is this a technical problem, a cultural problem, or both?
It's definitely both, but I'd argue it's primarily structural. When we look at the data, 67% of Dutch enterprises have AI decision-making authority scattered across departments without centralized oversight. That's not a technical limitation. That's an organizational design problem. You can't achieve EU AI Act compliance when nobody's actually accountable for AI risk at the enterprise level.
So there's this governance fragmentation piece. But there's also compliance uncertainty, right? I saw that 54% of Amsterdam mid-market enterprises lack formal EU AI Act readiness assessments. That seems shockingly high given the regulatory environment we're in.
It is shocking, and it represents genuine regulatory exposure. We're talking about potential fines up to $30 million or 6% of global revenue. That's not a rounding error. That's an existential threat for most organizations. The problem is that many enterprises treat the EU AI Act as something they'll address later, after they've proven the business case. By then, they've often locked themselves into patterns that are expensive to unwind.
There's also this concept of integration debt you mentioned. 71% of enterprises with AI pilots report that models remain siloed from actual operational workflows. Why does that happen so often?
Because pilots are typically isolated proof of concepts, built in labs with clean data and controlled conditions. The moment you try to integrate that model into production systems, where you've got legacy integrations, messy data pipelines, and governance requirements, suddenly it's a completely different problem. Teams often don't have the infrastructure, the governance oversight, or the cross-functional alignment to move from "it works in the lab" to "it works in production and generates measurable value."
And the business cost of that is real. A 2025 Deloitte study found that enterprises without formal AI readiness assessments take 3.2 times longer to move from pilot to production, and experience 2.8 times higher failure rates in revenue-generating use cases. Sam, that's a compounding problem for competitive positioning.
Absolutely. And here's the critical insight. The enterprises winning with AI in 2026 aren't the ones building the most sophisticated models. They're the ones that have aligned governance, compliance, and delivery from day one. Without that foundation, AI becomes technical debt rather than competitive advantage. You've got teams working on AI initiatives that don't connect to business outcomes, compliance requirements, or organizational strategy.
So let's talk about how organizations can actually address this. There's a structured approach here, a maturity model with 5 distinct levels. Can you walk us through what that looks like?
Sure. The model starts at level 1, initial, where you've got ad hoc AI experimentation with no governance structure at all. This is your typical pilot phase, high risk of non-compliance. Then level 2, developing, is where you have isolated projects with basic documentation and emerging governance. You're starting to think about the EU AI Act, but it's still fragmented.
And level 3?
Level 3 is managed. This is where you've got a defined AI governance framework, documented risk assessments, cross-functional oversight, and EU AI Act compliance for high-risk systems. Most enterprises in Amsterdam aiming for compliance should be targeting this level as a baseline. Then, level 4, optimized, is where you've integrated AI governance across the entire enterprise. You've got continuous compliance monitoring, automated risk tracking, and measurable business metrics tied to your AI initiatives.
And level 5?
Level 5 is leading. This is where AI governance becomes embedded in your organizational culture. You're proactively adapting to regulatory changes. You've got end-to-end transparency and auditability, and AI becomes a genuine source of competitive advantage rather than a compliance burden or technical headache.
Most Amsterdam enterprises are sitting at 2.8, so there's significant ground to cover to reach even level 3. What does that journey actually look like in practical terms?
It starts with a readiness assessment, an honest audit of where you actually stand across governance, risk management, compliance, and technical integration. Most organizations discover pretty quickly that they need to establish clear accountability structures, document their AI systems and their risk profiles, and create cross-functional governance bodies that include legal, compliance, business stakeholders, and technical teams.
And that's where tools like AetherMIND's readiness scans come in, right? They're designed specifically for this kind of assessment?
Exactly. The readiness scan provides that baseline assessment across maturity dimensions, compliance requirements, and operational readiness. It helps organizations understand not just where they are, but what specific capabilities, processes, and governance structures they need to build to move to the next level. It's not generic advice. It's targeted to the EU regulatory environment and the specific challenges Dutch enterprises face.
Let's talk about risk management, because that seems like a central piece of this. How should organizations think about AI risk in the context of EU AI Act compliance?
The EU AI Act uses a risk-based approach. You need to classify your AI systems by risk level: prohibited, high risk, limited risk, minimal risk, and implement controls proportionate to that risk. High-risk systems require significant governance, documentation, human oversight, performance monitoring, bias testing. The problem is that many organizations haven't even conducted that classification exercise. They don't know which of their AI systems are high risk and therefore need to meet those stringent requirements.
So that's a foundational piece. You can't build compliance without understanding what you're actually trying to comply with across your portfolio of AI initiatives.
Right. And it cascades from there. Once you've classified your systems, you need to establish governance processes: how you document models, how you test for bias and drift, how you manage the life cycle from development through deployment to retirement. You need clear ownership and accountability. You need audit trails. For many enterprises, that's a complete reframing of how they approach AI.
What about the organizational change management piece? Because shifting from ad hoc pilots to structured governance isn't just a process problem, it requires people to work differently.
Absolutely. And that's where a lot of roadmaps fail. Organizations build beautiful governance frameworks on paper, but teams don't adopt them because the workflows don't integrate with how people actually work. You need governance that's embedded in your development processes, your business processes, your decision-making workflows. It can't be a separate compliance bureaucracy that slows everything down. When done right, good governance actually accelerates AI deployment because you have clarity on requirements, risk boundaries, and accountability.
So for an Amsterdam enterprise listening to this right now and thinking, okay, we're sitting at maturity level 2.5, we've got scattered pilots, we're exposed on compliance. What's the first move?
First move, get a readiness assessment. Understand your current state honestly, where your governance gaps are, what compliance exposures you have, what your technical and organizational readiness looks like across different dimensions. Second move, establish a clear governance structure with executive sponsorship. You need a chief AI officer or equivalent who owns this across the organization. Third, map your AI portfolio and classify systems by risk. That tells you where to focus your governance investment first.
And that's a multi-month journey, not something you solve overnight?
Exactly. Most organizations moving from level 2 to level 3 are looking at 6 to 12 months, depending on complexity and existing technical debt. But here's the key insight. that investment pays for itself through reduced compliance risk, faster time to production for AI initiatives, and measurable business value. You're not just buying insurance, you're building a capability that makes your organization faster and more competitive with AI.
Sam, final question. For enterprises that get this right, that invest in governance and readiness now, what's the competitive advantage in 2026 and beyond?
Speed and confidence. Organizations with mature AI governance can deploy AI initiatives faster because they've eliminated the downstream compliance and integration headaches. They can confidently scale AI across the enterprise because they've got visibility and control. And they attract better AI talent because engineers want to work somewhere that's thoughtful about AI governance, not reactive. By 2026, the competitive gap between mature and immature AI organizations is only going to widen.
That's a compelling vision. Sam, thanks for breaking this down. Listeners, if you want to dive deeper into these readiness assessment frameworks, the specific maturity model, and how organizations like yours can actually implement AI governance in practice, head over to etherlink.ai and find the full article. We've got detailed guidance on the 5-level framework, real-world implementation patterns, and specific compliance requirements under the EU AI Act. Thanks for tuning in to EtherLink AI Insights.
And remember, the time to build governance is now, not after you've locked yourself into choices you can't easily change. Catch you on the next one.